In 1969, Detroit stopped building cars that were simply fast and started building cars that looked like they belonged in a wind tunnel or a laboratory instead of a showroom. Dodge bolted an 18-inch nose cone and a 2-foot-tall rear wing onto a Charger just to break 200 miles an hour on a NASCAR superspeedway. Chevrolet built 69 Camaros with a hand-assembled aluminum engine, so expensive it cost more than the rest of the car combined. And Ford stuffed a massive NASCAR racing engine into a Mustang that was never really built to be driven. It existed purely so Ford could legally race it on Sundays. By the end of this countdown, you'll know exactly which 10 American cars earned the right to be called the fastest of 1969, and why so many of the ideas born this year would still be shaping muscle cars for decades afterward. This isn't just a list of fast cars. This is a story of the year Detroit's horsepower war collided head-on with aerodynamics, homologation rules, and outside contractors hand-building engines nobody could quite believe was legal to sell to the public. A rental catalog engine so extreme it needed its own trunk-mounted battery, a wing tall enough to block a sunset. 1969 didn't just add horsepower to the muscle car formula, it permanently changed what a muscle car was allowed to look like. By 1969, NASCAR's homologation rules required any manufacturer to build at least 500 street-legal copies of a race car before it could compete on the track, a rule that forced Ford, Dodge, and Plymouth to sell some of the most extreme, purpose-built machines in American history directly to ordinary buyers. Ford developed an entirely new 429 cubic inch racing engine and squeezed it into a Mustang purely to satisfy that rule. Dodge, desperate to beat Ford's growing aerodynamic advantage on NASCAR's high-bank superspeedways, built a radically reshaped Charger with an aircraft-inspired nose and towering rear wing. And Chevrolet, working with outside dealers and drag racers, used an obscure ordering system called the Central Office Production Order to sneak engines far larger than GM's own corporate rules technically allowed into the Camaro. It's one of the most inventive, most technically ambitious years in the entire muscle car era, a year where the line between race car and street car nearly disappeared completely. Let's start the countdown. Number 10 introduces one of the strangest, most cartoonishly styled muscle cars of the entire decade, the AMC Hurst SC/Rambler, nicknamed the Scrambler. Built through a partnership between American Motors and Hurst Performance, the SC/Rambler dropped AMC's 390 cubic inch V8, factory rated at 315 horsepower, into the small, lightweight Rambler American body wrapped in a loud, unmistakable red, white, and blue paint scheme, complete with a functional hood scoop and a giant racing stripe running down the hood, roof, and trunk. It represented AMC's most direct, most unapologetic entry into the muscle car wars, built by a company most people still associated with economical family transportation. Just 1,512 SC/Ramblers were built for the model year, and the well-tuned example could run the quarter mile in the low 14-second range, genuinely quick numbers from a company nobody expected to compete at this level, and proved that even Detroit's smallest independent automaker wanted a piece of 1969's horsepower war. Number 9 belongs to one of Ford Motor Company's own aerodynamic specials, built specifically to match Dodge's growing advantage on NASCAR's biggest superspeedways. Sharing much of its aerodynamic engineering directly with the Ford Torino Talladega, the Cyclone Spoiler II featured an extended, more sharply pointed nose designed to cut through the air more efficiently at high speed. Buyers could order it with Ford's 428 Cobra Jet, or in a small number of examples, the same 429 cubic inch Boss engine developed for NASCAR homologation, sharing the exact same racing pedigree found in the far more famous Mustang you'll hear about later in this countdown. Built in genuinely small numbers and largely overshadowed by its more famous Dodge and Plymouth rivals, the Cyclone Spoiler II remains one of the more overlooked entries in Ford's aerodynamic NASCAR program, proof that the entire industry, not just Chrysler, understood exactly how important aerodynamics had suddenly become. Number 8 introduces one of the cleverest, most cost-effective horsepower tricks of the entire model year: 3 two-barrel carburetors stacked together on a single intake manifold. Debuting mid-year, the Super Beast six-pack combined the 440 cubic inch Magnum V8 with a trio of Holley two-barrel carburetors, factory rated at 390 horsepower and 490 pound-feet of torque, nearly matching the exotic HEMI's real-world performance at a fraction of the price and complexity. The package came fitted to a distinctive functional fiberglass lift-off hood, secured with racing-style pins, that had to be physically removed to access the engine underneath. It gave budget-conscious buyers genuine HEMI-adjacent performance without the HEMI's steep price tag or its picky high-maintenance reputation. Proof that Chrysler's engineers had found yet another clever way to squeeze serious horsepower out of an already well-proven engine. Number 7 marks the debut of a nameplate that would go on to define Pontiac's performance image for decades: the Trans Am. Named after the SCCA's Trans-American Road Racing Series, the 1969 Trans Am was built on the second-generation Firebird platform, offered with either the Ram Air 3 400 cubic inch V8 rated at 335 horsepower, or the rare Ram Air 4 rated at 345 horsepower and built with round port cylinder heads for improved high RPM breathing. Every Trans Am was finished in cameo white with distinctive blue racing stripes, honoring an SCCA sponsorship agreement Pontiac had struck to help fund the car's development. Just 697 Trans Ams were built for its debut model year, making the original 1969 version one of the rarest cars carrying the nameplate that would go on to become one of the most recognizable performance badges in American history throughout the following decade. Number 6 introduces one of the most famous dealer-modified muscle cars in American history, the Yenko Camaro, born from a Chevrolet dealer's creative use of GM's own internal ordering system. Working with the central office production order system, Pennsylvania Chevrolet dealer Don Yenko convinced Chevrolet to install the solid lifter L72 427 cubic inch big block into the Camaro, officially rated at 425 horsepower and 460 pound-feet of torque, a figure most experts agree was itself deliberately underrated. What started as a special order request for around 200 cars quickly grew to nearly 1,000 units once other dealers around the country caught on and began ordering the same package. A Yenko Camaro could run the quarter mile in under 13 seconds straight from the dealership, and the car remains one of the most celebrated examples of how a single enthusiastic dealer, working the system creatively, could push an entire manufacturer's own internal rules further than the factory had ever originally intended. Before this countdown reaches its final 5 cars, it's worth pausing on the single NASCAR rule that quietly reshaped almost everything else you're about to hear. To keep stock car racing honest, NASCAR required manufacturers to build a minimum of 500 street-legal copies of any car or engine before it could compete on the track, a rule meant to keep pure one-off race cars out of competition. Instead, it forced Ford, Dodge, and Plymouth into an increasingly extreme arms race, each company building genuinely radical, purpose-built machines just to hit that 500-unit minimum, then selling the leftovers to ordinary buyers who had no idea they were driving around in what was essentially a race car with license plates. It's one of the strangest, most consequential rules in all of motorsports history, a regulation designed to prevent extremism that instead produced some of the single most extreme production cars Detroit ever built. Number 5 is the car that arms race actually produced, the Dodge Charger Daytona, the single most radical aerodynamic special of the entire muscle car era. Built specifically to close the speed gap with Ford's own aerodynamic racers, the Daytona added an 18-inch pointed nose cone and a towering 23-inch rear wing mounted high enough to sit in clean, undisturbed air and tall enough to clear the trunk lid entirely. Available with either the 440 Magnum V8 or the 426 HEMI,
A Daytona driven by Buddy Baker became the first close-course stock car in history to officially break 200 miles an hour, recording a lap of 200.447 miles an hour at Alabama's Talladega Superspeedway. Chrysler built 503 Daytonas for the entire 1969 model year to satisfy NASCAR's homologation requirement, just 70 of them with the HEMI, and the car's radical aerodynamics proved so effective that NASCAR would eventually rewrite its own rulebook specifically to slow aero cars like it back down. Number 4 is Ford's own answer to the exact same homologation rule. A car built almost entirely as a legal formality, wrapped around one of the most powerful engines Ford had ever built. To compete with Chrysler's dominant 426 HEMI on NASCAR's superspeedways, Ford developed the all-new 429 cubic-inch semi-hemispherical V8, nicknamed the shotgun engine for its massive wide-open exhaust ports. The engine was so large it didn't actually fit inside a standard Mustang's engine bay at all. Ford contracted an outside company, CarCraft, to modify each car's front suspension and shock towers by hand just to make room. Officially rated at a conservative 375 horsepower, most period estimates place the real street output closer to 500 horsepower, with NASCAR race versions of the same engine reportedly exceeding 600. Just 859 Boss 429 Mustangs were built for the 1969 model year, each one essentially a hand-built homologation certificate, wearing a Mustang badge, a car that existed purely so Ford could legally race the same engine on Sunday afternoons. Number 3 brings back the car most directly responsible for proving a genuine muscle car didn't need a high price tag: the Plymouth Road Runner, now in its second, even more popular model year. The 1969 Road Runner continued to offer the legendary 426 HEMI as an option atop the standard 383 cubic-inch V8, factory rated at 425 horsepower and 490 pound-feet of torque. Plymouth also introduced the mid-year 446 barrel package, closely mirroring Dodge's own Super B six-pack, giving budget-minded buyers a nearly HEMI-level performance option at a considerably lower price. Roadrunner sales climbed even further in 1969, cementing the nameplate as one of the single most important and most beloved muscle cars of the entire Golden Age. Proof for the second year running that the formula Plymouth had stumbled onto in 1968 was no fluke at all. Number 2 belongs to a smaller, lighter, and in many ways even more dangerous cousin of the Yenko Camaro, the Yenko Modified Nova, dropping the same enormous 427 cubic-inch big block into Chevrolet's compact economy car. Working through the same COPO ordering process used for the Camaro, Don Yenko and a small handful of other dealers fitted the L72 427, officially rated at 425 horsepower, into the significantly lighter Nova body. With considerably less weight to move than the full-size Impala or even the Camaro, a Yenko Nova offered a genuinely startling power-to-weight ratio, capable of embarrassing far more expensive cars in a straight line. Built in extremely small numbers, the Yenko Nova remains one of the most sought-after sleeper muscle cars of the entire era. A car that looked, on the surface, like an ordinary compact sedan, while hiding one of the most powerful engines Chevrolet had ever built underneath its unassuming sheet metal. And that brings us to number 1. The rarest, most expensive, and by most measures the fastest American production car of 1969, the Chevrolet COPO Camaro ZL1. Conceived by drag racer Dick Harrell and ordered through Fred Gibbs Chevrolet specifically to meet NHRA's 50-car minimum for superstock competition, the ZL1 package installed an entirely aluminum block 427 cubic-inch big block into the Camaro, developed directly from Chevrolet's L88 racing program. Officially rated at 430 horsepower, the ZL1 engine alone cost buyers over $4,000, more than the price of an entire base Camaro, and most experts agree its true output was closer to 500 horsepower.
just 69 ZL1 Camaros were ever built, making it to this day one of the single rarest and most valuable muscle cars General Motors ever produced. A well-prepared ZL1 could clear the quarter mile in the 11-second range on drag slicks, and modern examples routinely sell for well over $400,000 at collector auctions. Genuinely too expensive, too rare, and too extreme for almost anyone in 1969, the ZL1 Camaro earned the top spot on this list as the single most uncompromising car of the entire model year.
So what did all of this actually prove? That NASCAR's homologation rules, meant to keep racing fair, instead pushed Detroit's engineers to build some of the most radical street cars in the history of the entire industry. That a clever dealer working the system or an outside contractor hand-modifying a Mustang's engine bay could push a manufacturer's own internal rules and displacement limits further than the corporate office had ever originally intended. And that some of the ideas born out of pure necessity in 1969, aerodynamic bodywork, triple carburetor six-packs, hand-built racing engines sold directly to the public, would go on to influence muscle cars for years afterward. Every car on this list was built to solve a specific, often bureaucratic problem: a homologation minimum, a displacement rule, a racing sanctioning body's own regulations. And in solving those problems, Detroit accidentally built some of the most legendary, most permanently important muscle cars in American automotive history. Which 1969 American car would you bring back if you could only choose one? The ultra-rare ZL1 Camaro, the 200-mile-an-hour Dodge Daytona, or the NASCAR-bred Boss 429 Mustang? Did your father, your uncle, or a neighbor on your street own one of these cars? Write the name in the comments below.